Are you ready? Hey, think you could tell us what to do? You think you could tell us what to wear? You think that you're better? Well, you better get ready. Bow to the masters. Break it down!
Hi, welcome to another episode of Straight Lions Talk Podcast. If you guys have not been with the show before, what we do here is talk strictly Detroit Lions football. Whatever it has to do with the Detroit Lions, we cover. Possible head coaching changes, possible new GMs, possible pending retirements, draft, free agency. Anything that happens to Detroit Lions, we cover. And this week has not been a letdown in Detroit Lions land. Every week this year has not really been a letdown Detroit Lions land-wise. We've had so many things happen, and this week we thought what was going to happen hasn't happened yet, and what we didn't think was even possible to happen and caught us all by surprise happened, which is Calvin Johnson possibly retiring. We will cover that. We will also cover the final game of the 2015 season for the Detroit Lions, a 24-20 victory over the Chicago Bears, which gives us a 6-game win streak against the Chicago Bears. That's incredible. 3 years in a row, we've beaten them every time. That's great. That's a team that used to pound us on a regular basis. We will also cover what we thought was going to be the hot news. In our last show, we were anticipating the possible firing of Jim Caldwell and the implementation of a new GM into the Detroit Lions system and possibly a new and brighter future for the Detroit Lions. That has not happened yet. Either one. Jim Caldwell is still with the team. Looks like he's going to be our head coach. And we have not hired a new GM as of Thursday of this week following the 2015 season. So where do we go with this? We will talk about it. It's something we didn't anticipate. We recorded the show later this week just for the fact that we thought there would be a new GM or a possible firing. But we have to talk about is Calvin Johnson. That's where we'll start. But I want to start with you guys first. I would like to thank everybody out there who's been listening to us all season long. It's been great. The responses have been great. I really appreciate it. And through all the efforts from you guys and all the people here at Straight Lions Talk, we have been picked up by NFL Draft Bible. And that's been a huge get for us. I'm so excited about it. It's beyond my expectations this early into this show we developed. It's an incredible site. The NFL Draft has always meant so much to so many people, and it especially means a lot to Detroit Lions fans because for the most part, for so many years, that was the way that we found hope for this team was through the draft. Whether it was drafting a Joey Harrington, drafting a Ndamukong Suh, drafting Matthew Stafford, Calvin Johnson, whoever it was, we always thought that gave us a new hope for a change within the organization and a change into a winning organization to replicate some of the great organizations around the league. We always thought that the draft would give us those stepping stones to be able to take the next step as an organization and get to the ultimate goal, which is a Super Bowl. Obviously, if you're a well-educated Lions fan, that has not happened. But partnering with NFL Draft Bible has been huge for us. If you guys have not checked out their site, please do. It's an incredible site. It makes you a better, smarter fan. With a new GM coming in, we don't know what direction we're going to go into. They will cover things like that. Their website's amazing. If you want to find them, it's NFLDraftBible.com. It's NFL Draft Bible on Twitter. It's NFL Draft Bible on Facebook, on Instagram, on Vine, whatever it may be. Social media-wise, they're on it, at NFL Draft Bible. They're incredible. If you guys want to find the small school guy and get a lot of information about it, or go to their website and find an interview with those small school guys, that's who they cover. They don't really get into so much of the mainstream guys, the big names, the Joey Bosa's and stuff like that, because you already know about all those guys. They've been covered so much. They get you more in depth into the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round guys, undrafted free agents, stuff like that where the meat of a team is actually built. They cover all that stuff. So if you guys have not checked out NFL Draft Bible, please do. We're so excited to be partnering with them. We're so excited that they wanted us on board on their team. It's an incredible effort. We're going to be a Lions insider for them. It's going to be huge. It's only going to grow from here, and it's going to all because of NFL Draft Bible and you guys. I really appreciate both NFL Draft Bible and you guys, the fans, for joining us every week to listen to this show. I really appreciate it. But if you want to follow this show, you can follow us at STR Lions Talk on Twitter. It's actually STR Lions Talk Podcast on Twitter. So if you guys want to follow us there, you can. If you guys want to follow us on YouTube, we are back on YouTube. It's YouTube channel STR Lions Talk. We actually post the podcast there now. Before we did videos on there, we went away from that, went to a podcast format, but we started posting the podcast to the YouTube channel. And also, we are trying to get on iHeartRadio. We're still working on getting on iTunes. It's an absolute pain in the butt to try to get on there. And we're developing a website, and we're also working on getting on Facebook. So this offseason is going to be huge for Straight Lions Talk, just like it's going to be huge for you guys, the Detroit Lions fans, going forward. And nothing's huger right now this week. It's even masked the whole change of possibly a head coach and GM is the news that Calvin Johnson possibly going to retire. Are you kidding me? A 30-year-old wide receiver with a lot still left in his tank. The news kind of came out of nowhere. I think it surprised a lot of people. I think you'd have to be pretty well ingrained into the Detroit Lions organization and day-to-day operations to maybe have an idea that this was going to happen or be one of Calvin Johnson's good pals to think that this possibly was a consideration right after the season that he would announce he's possibly going to retire this year, leaving $24 million on the table. I just don't know where to go with this, so we're going to ask you guys some questions. I want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think? What do you guys think Calvin's going to do? Do you think he's going to stay? Do you think he's going to go? I mean, I'm asking you guys, the fans, why do you think he left? We'll give you our opinion, but I want to hear from you guys. Why do you think Calvin Johnson's leaving? I've heard all the regular things, just like Barry Sanders, just like typical Detroit Lions. But we have some different views here about that. We'll cover them here in just a second. But, I want to hear from you guys. Why did Calvin Johnson, after what was a tumultuous season, didn't live up to expectations. I don't think it lived up to Calvin's expectations. I think he thought, finally, I have a chance to go into the playoffs for another year. We can make a run. We can build on what we did last year. We're going to improve. And it just didn't happen that way. From what started out as such a promising opening first half to a season and then turned into a debacle the next 7 games, it just didn't turn out right. And I think Calvin Johnson's sick of that. Obviously sick of the losing, just like Barry was. I think he's honestly sick of not having any direction within the organization. It's something we talked about here in hiring a new GM and hiring a new president, that all this stuff starts at the top. The top organizations around the league, the top businesses, the top anything you do in life, the top person, the leader in charge, sets the tone, sets the direction of where everything's going to go. And I think Calvin Johnson is sick and tired of constant coaching changes, GM changes, personnel changes, and a constant rebuild situation. And I think of all the reports of possibly Jim Caldwell getting fired, possibly a new GM, a new GM coming in, and them blowing up the whole matrix and starting over again. I think that scared Calvin Johnson. Obviously, Calvin Johnson doesn't have that many years left, which is why people were speculating Calvin Johnson possibly could get traded. Calvin Johnson possibly could get let go. And I think that weighed on him too. I don't think he wanted to go really anywhere else. I don't think he wanted to start over again for the last 3 years of his career with a new organization, a new city. I think he really likes being in Detroit. But through all that, where it starts is leadership. We talked about it on this show. The leadership is where the Detroit Lions have been lacking for years. People don't know what direction this team is going. The only saving grace for us right now is the Cleveland Browns. They're in the same situation. They have no leadership at the top, and that organization is a mess. They're a mess in the front office. They're a mess on the field. The Detroit Lions aren't such a mess on the field anymore. They were early on. And last year they kind of had that situation taken, changed up, but organizationally they are a mess. I think Calvin Johnson's sick of it, and I think this would be a different situation if we were a more contending team. If he was with the Patriots his whole career, I don't think he'd be retiring. I think he'd be just thrilled they're going to the playoffs again with the possibility of going to another Super Bowl. I think he'd be thrilled if he was at the Packers, the Steelers, the Arizona Cardinals. I just think he would be. I don't think he'd be doing this if he had someone at the top he could talk to. There's no one to talk to at the top. There's no one that has any stability there or name recognition where he can walk in and say, hey, look, here's my feelings. I don't know if I want to play anymore. I don't know if I want to do this anymore this late in my career. I don't want to be beat up anymore. I'm tired of losing. I don't think he had that relationship with William Clay Ford Sr. I don't think he had has that relationship with Martha Ford. I don't know what his relationship with Martin Mayhew was. Maybe that was a thing that really bummed him out when he was fired. He had no one to talk to. I don't think he went and talked to Tom Lalonde. They went out and had beers or anything. I don't know. I don't know that. I'm just speculating. But I think that was one of the biggest reasons that he may be doing this, because have Jim Caldwell went and talked to him? Probably not. Possibly, I don't know that for a fact, but has he went and called Calvin Johnson with his job pending here in the next week or two, depending on who we hire as a GM? Has Jim Caldwell reached out to Calvin Johnson and asked him, hey, what's going on? Why don't you come back for another year? I don't think he did, because how can he do that not knowing what his situation is? And I think that's the biggest thing that irks Calvin Johnson. If anyone out there's worked for a business or a organization that doesn't have any direction, it is frustrating as all heck when you'd have no idea what you're doing day to day and what direction the company is going and what direction you're going with the company. It's frustrating. I think Calvin Johnson's there. I don't think he wants to rebuild. I think he sees promise in this team. And by all means, he played a power move here. He took the option away of the Detroit Lions trying to renegotiate his deal. He took the option away that he could possibly be traded and or cut. Is he going to retire or stay a Lion? That's just the way it is. And is he holding the Detroit Lions, feet to the fire on either keeping Caldwell or firing Caldwell? Now, it's come out today that he really wants Caldwell to stay. When it first came out, I was possibly thinking he didn't have any belief in the coaching staff and the direction the coaching staff was taking the team. And he was like, I'm not coming back for another year of this crap. So, but it sounds like it's the other way. He wants Jim Caldwell to stay. So ultimately, if Calvin Johnson really wants Jim Caldwell to stay, and that means bringing Calvin Johnson back, I imagine Jim Caldwell's staying now, guys. Hate to be the bearer of bad news for any of you out there that want Jim Caldwell gone. I just don't think it's going to happen. But I don't think this would have happened if the Detroit Lions were strong from the president down or ownership down. I don't think this would have happened if it was the Rooneys, the Crafts in Green Bay, possibly Kansas City, organizations that have a long track record of success throughout the years, that have a strong owner that's in the day-to-day operations but not meddling, a strong president that has a direction for the team, a GM that has a direction for the team, and a seasoned head coach that always gives him the direction where he's going. Is it possibly he's frustrated about where he is in the scheme of things for the Detroit Lions? Is he being phased out? Does he feel like he's being phased out? Remember, a couple times this year, he was only targeted 2 or 3 times in 2 games. And I mean 2 games, between the 2 games, he was targeted 2 or 3 times. He wasn't targeted 2 or 3 times in the game, but he was only targeted 3 times total between 2 games. So, is he starting to have, some doubts about how the Lions want him in the future? Does he just not want to play next year, get all beat up, possibly really get hurt bad, and then be cut next year because his cap number goes to $4 million, which is a manageable dead money number? So, right now, Calvin Johnson holds all the cards. Are the Detroit Lions going to call his bluff? Are they going to just say, well, if you want to retire, go ahead and retire? That would be a huge mistake. I'd like to, obviously he'd retire a Detroit Lion, but I think it hurts him. People say he retires just like Barry Sanders. Yeah, it's about the same age they retired, at the same point in their careers, things of that nature. But the thing was, Barry Sanders was a Hall of Famer at this point. And right now, Calvin Johnson is not a Hall of Famer. He is not a Hall of Famer as we speak right now. He doesn't have enough on his resume. He's like 40th in catches. He's 27th in touchdowns and 20th in yards. He's not, he's top 20 in a couple categories, but he's not a Hall of Famer as we speak right now. So if that's his ultimate goal to get to the Hall of Fame, then he should come back. Unless we're going to set a precedence now with all the guys retiring early due to them saying they don't want to live out the last few years of their lives with injuries and not be able to move when they're in their 40s and 50s. You know, with these guys retiring earlier and earlier every year, it seems like. I mean, there's a gluttony of retirements last year. Basically, the whole San Francisco 49er team retired. You know, with all this happening around the league, is this going to set a new precedence of, you know, does Calvin Johnson get in the Hall of Fame on what? Oh, if he would have stayed, he would have had these numbers, so he's a Hall of Famer. I don't really think it's going to go that way. And plus, wide receiver is a tough position to get in the Hall of Fame anyway. I mean, Chris Carter took a long time. Art Monk took forever. At the time when he retired, he was the leading wide receiver in all of NFL history in receptions. And he couldn't get in for years. It took him forever to get in. Michael Irvin took a long time to get in. It just doesn't happen automatically for guys that had better careers than Calvin Johnson. By him walking away early is only going to hurt Calvin Johnson. So our opinion here on the Calvin Johnson situation is, I think if we had stronger ownership, like we talked about, and more leadership from the top, I don't think this would be happening. You know, if I was the owner, I'd be on a plane talking to Calvin, telling him, come on back, play this out. I can't believe he's really going to leave $24 million on the table. I think ultimately he'll come back. I think it's a reactionary thing to the end of the season, the disappointment of this season with so much high expectations going in. I think he was actually pretty pumped about this season going in. I think he thought big things were going to happen. I personally thought we were going to be contending for the divisional title. I thought Matt Stafford would be a top 10 quarterback, which he is. That actually turned out into my favor, which I didn't think it was by the way he started. But, you know, with all the expectations I had, you know, I thought we were going to win a playoff game, contend for the division title, win 10, 11 games, you know, things like that, and maybe possibly make a run at the Super Bowl. I mean, this team was close to getting to the playoffs this year. If we beat Green Bay without that Hail Mary and we beat St. Louis, we're in the playoffs, guys. We beat Green Bay out. We're in Green Bay spot. We're playing this week. So, I mean, that's how close it was. That's how close everything is in the NFL. So, ultimately, I honestly think Calvin Johnson's coming back. I think right now it's easy to say he's done. I mean, we've all had disappointing things happen in our lives, and our natural reaction is to either quit or say, I'm done with that, whether it's marriage, whether it's a job, whether it's friendships, whatever it may be. We've all been in those situations when something that's happened that's been a huge disappointment to you after a number of weeks of having to endure it, you naturally instantly say, I'm done, and you want to walk away. But after you walk away from it and be able to clear your head and get the bumps and bruises off you and the bad taste out of your mouth from the things that happened that were so vivid to you, I think ultimately he's going to come back once he settles down, talks to a few people. He has a strong family. So I think everything's going to point to him coming back for at least one more season. Now, next year, I don't see it, but for now, I think he's going to come back. Now, we were huge proponents of trading Calvin Johnson last year before the draft. You know, hindsight's 2020. Maybe we should have. Maybe we should have traded him at the trade deadline, this year, but it didn't happen that way. So this is a situation we're stuck with, but here at Straight Lions Talk, we think Calvin Johnson is going to stay and be on the field when the 2016 season starts. And I think it's going to be his last season in Detroit, so possibly does that bring on a huge season for the Detroit Lions and maybe a Super Bowl run. I don't know. We'll look into that next year in a preview show, but hey, we're just speculating and just trying to bring some hope to you guys. But realistically, not trying to bring hope to you guys, but in our honest opinion, I think he comes back. I don't think he retires. I think he comes back for one more season with the Detroit Lions. Moving on to the game, the final game of the 2015 season against the Chicago Bears. Like I said before, we're the winners of 6 straight against Chicago. That is huge for the Detroit Lions. I mean, that's a big get. I mean, this used to be a team that beat up on us so bad when Lovie Smith was there. We were so bad. They just wiped the door with us. We had quite an extensive losing streak against them at home, I'm pretty sure. But this was a team that was an automatic loss when they came in with subpar quarterbacks. Kyle Orton's, Rex Grossman, guys like that would come in and just light us up, make our defense look like a high school defense playing against pros. It was just a joke. But we are the winners of 6 straight against the Chicago Bears. It's an organization I think is on the uptick with John Fox there. I think they will be better next year. There'll be something to contend with. They looked better throughout the year. They kind of fizzled there at the end, but they're trying to flip that roster over and make a few changes here and there. The big question for them is Jay Cutler going to come back? I mean, he's Jay Cutler, but still, he's better than probably drafting a guy in the 4th round and thinking he's going to solve all your problems. So with the Bears possibly getting better next year, it was nice for the Lions, like we talked about, to go on a high note. Go out this season on a high note. Go out the winners of 2 or 3 straight. Go on a 3-game winning streak. I think that's going to help going into the next season. I know people say that how can momentum help for the next year? I just think it's an inspiration, which was surprising to me that Calvin wanted to be done after this last game because he had such a good game. He had 10 receptions, 137 yards, and a touchdown. It was probably one of his best games this season, besides probably the Philadelphia game, was his other highlight game of the year. He played extremely well. He was the main source of offense for us besides Matthew Stafford. Our running game was our leading rusher was 44 yards, Amir Abdullah. Next leading receiver was 49 yards, Joique Bell. Golden Tate kind of had a down game for him. Theo Riddick didn't have a great game. The only other touchdowns came from our tight end, Eric Ebron and Tim Wright. Actually, Stafford could have thrown the one he threw to Ebron to Tim Wright because he was wide open in the flat. But, this game came down to a close game. I thought it would. We talked about it last week. We thought it would be a 3-point game, 7-point game, somewhere in there. And it came down to a 4-point game. The critical thing for this game was the 59-yard field goal for Matt Prater. It was huge, that field goal with 1 second left before half. That was a huge 3 points because that would have changed the outcome of this game drastically if we were up by 4 going into the 4th quarter because the Bears were driving. The equalizer of this game was Ezekiel Ansah. He was a man-child again, just wreaking havoc on Jay Cutler. The 2 interceptions were totally because of Ezekiel Ansah. One, he hit his arm. The other one, he was in his face instantly and forced him to throw an interception at the end of the game. So, huge kudos to Ezekiel Ansah. Huge year for him. We talked about it this year we talked about it at the beginning of the season that to replace Ndamukong Suh, Ezekiel Ansah was going to have to step up for this defense to have success. And this defense did have more success in the second half of the season, just as the offense did. As the offense improved, the defense seemed to improve too every week compared to what it was doing prior to the season. And, besides Jay Cutler pushing Ezekiel Ansah at the end of the game after that sack, that's typical Jay Cutler. What an idiot. That guy's such a pain. There's always something Jay Cutler Lions-wise every time. It always seems like there's some kind of fight or whatnot going on with those two. It's just he's such an idiot. I would love for him to be done in Chicago and them take a flyer on some 4th-round quarterback like we talked about earlier and just be bad for the next 5 years, 6 years. But the game itself, not a lot happening there. It was a good game. The Lions played well on the road. Hlodinata played well, had a sack. Tier Whitehead had a sack. I hope we re-sign him. I mean, that's a lot of questions for the Detroit Lions. A lot of free agents. We have a lot of money, but it's going to take a lot of money to re-sign the guys we have, let alone go after pieces we need for the team. So we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But the game itself, it was a good victory. I'm glad the Detroit Lions went out on a high note because we want things to be on a positive note in the offseason, whether we keep Caldwell, whether we don't, whether it's a new GM and head coach combination, or if it's just Caldwell and a new GM. We want the Lions going into their off seasons thinking positive, not thinking, oh crap, we have a rebuild. Who's our quarterback going to be? I think we solidified who our quarterback's going to be. No one played better over the last 8 games probably than Matthew Stafford, probably than Russell Wilson. He played phenomenal football. Finished with 32 touchdown passes, 4,200 yards. His highest quarterback rating as a pro, 97. Just phenomenal. His yards per attempt, everything was up this year. And they really improved under Jim Bob Cooter. No matter what, I hope we retain him. I think the success he and Stafford are having together is what we've always hoped Matthew Stafford would find in an offensive coordinator. You kind of saw glimpses of it with Scott Linehan, but there actually seems to be a good rapport and a good connection. I think those two think a lot alike. They see things the same way. And I think that Cooter has the ability to develop an offense that Matthew Stafford can picture in his head and is able to run on a more consistent basis than he ever has. And I think the other thing Jim Bob Cooter has done very well for Matthew Stafford has been giving Matthew Stafford more responsibility. It's something we've talked about a lot on this show, that we've always thought that Matthew Stafford would be better suited having more responsibilities within the system, having more onus on the system himself, making these line adjustments, making some of the play calls, audibles, telling the coach what he sees and what he thinks the play should be in the next series and what they're trying to do out there. Just give him more of a mat to work with, because I think he's that type of guy. I think the more you put on his plate, the better he is. That's just who I think he is. I think he excels at that. And I think it paid dividends because, the rumors were Cooter put more on his plate once he took over, and the results were better. The offensive line was better. I know he simplified the blocking scheme and the verbiage, but, Matthew Stafford is able to recognize within the system Cooter's running where receivers are going to be, where they should be, and he's able to be more accurate with his passes because he's never been a great, a really accurate quarterback. He usually throws the ball like 6 inches behind a guy instead of a foot in front of the numbers like it should be. But what he's done under Cooter is recognize situations and recognize where people should be and anticipate where they're going to be better than he ever has with any system he's been under in the previous years in Detroit. So that's a positive going forward. But we'll see what happens. I believe Jim Caldwell will be back. But getting into that, we'll segue into that right now. Will Jim Caldwell be back? I personally think at this point he might as well be back. He finished the season strong. I think he's a terrible in-game manager. But there are worse coaches out there. But some of his snafus this year are just legendary Lions stuff that are going to go down in the history of Detroit Lions lore forever. The Hail Mary. We didn't anticipate a Hail Mary. Really? At 60 yards with no time left, you thought they were going to throw the ball around and lateral it 600,000 times? Not putting Ezekiel Ansah in that situation. Leaving Haloti Ngata, Jason Jones, and Darryl Tapp on the line to rush 3 instead of pressuring him. We set that play up for him, leaving Ezekiel Ansah downfield, not having Calvin Johnson in the game because I guess Calvin Johnson can't tackle if they start to lateral the football. Just a variety of things that Jim Caldwell has done wrong this year. The Minnesota game in Detroit when Calvin Johnson caught a touchdown pass, Jim Caldwell doesn't throw the red flag. We run the ball 3 more times. We needed that time to make a run at beating Minnesota in Detroit, but we didn't have time to do it because Jim Caldwell did not throw the flag when Calvin Johnson actually cut a touchdown pass on a pop. The ball hit one of the linemen, popped up in the air, Calvin caught it. The ball went across the line, but Caldwell didn't throw the red flag for them to review it. They ran the ball to George Wynn, the fullback, and I think Joyke Bell, and couldn't get it in. Ended up settling for a field goal when the week before, when they should have taken the field goal, they went for it on 4th down, made it, which was a bad call against the Chicago Bears that worked out in his favor. Leaving 10 men on the field twice, being out-coached in a number of different games because he's not a very good in-game coach. He's not. He makes a lot of mistakes in-game. But with all that said, as much as I didn't want him back and I didn't think he would be back, and especially after the St. Louis game when people said this team didn't quit, but I could have swore I felt like they quit against Kansas City and it felt like they quit against Arizona, and I didn't see a lot of spring in their step against St. Louis after the Hail Mary game. So, with all that said, I guess we should just keep him because we're a week into this thing. A lot of coaches haven't been hired at this point, but, Lovie Smith was fired today, and I don't want him as our defensive coordinator if Terrell Austin leaves, and I don't want Leslie Frazier as our defensive coordinator to go run a Tampa 2 style defense. That's why Lovie Smith is fired, is because he runs an outdated defense that is very predictable, and teams have figured out how to beat it throughout the NFL. So, yeah, please, Lovie Smith and or Leslie Frazier, please do not come to the Detroit Lions as our defensive coordinator, because more than likely we're going to lose Terrell Austin. But back to Jim Caldwell, yep, with all those negative things and bad things I said about Jim Caldwell, at this point, with the pending retirement of Calvin Johnson, all the players have stuck up for him, saying what a great coach he is, and they all want him back. I think at this point, you might as well just keep him, because the options out there aren't great. I mean, I really like Chip Kelly, but I know it'd raise a lot of eyebrows around here for hiring him. I don't know if he would flip things on their head too bad and want certain guys, and we have to change everything up because of his system. So I don't think he's a very good option for Detroit right now. I'm not going to get any of the guys we always hold. Bill Cowell or Tom Coughlin's not coming. So at this point, let's just keep Jim Caldwell. The GM search tomorrow, Sheldon White's going to interview for the job. I ultimately think Sheldon White will get this job. I don't think a lot of credible GMs looking to do things their way and put their stamp on this organization, and any of those guys that are eager beavers enough to try to turn this organization around and turn it into like a Patriots, Steelers, Green Bay organization. I don't think any of those guys are going to want this job if they're saddled with Caldwell as their coach next season, especially if the season starts off the way it did this year. He'll be looked at as he should have made changes. This is the typical Lions. And honestly, at this point, I think it's going to be Sheldon White and Jim Caldwell. We talked about it last week. I would be shocked if another GM came in. We talked to the guy from Seattle, Kitchener, Quinn from the Patriots. The guy from the Giants is slipping my mind right now. I should have written it down. The guy from the Giants. Sorry for that, guys. I should have that information. I just don't have it right on me right now. But, yeah, and with White interviewing tomorrow, I really think it's going to be Sheldon White and Jim Caldwell as the coach and GM going forward, especially if they want to keep Calvin Johnson. It sounds like they need to keep Jim Caldwell. I don't love it because I wanted to fire Jim Schwartz a year before we fired him because I didn't think there was any more hope. But I just can't stand Jim Caldwell's in-game managing. And what worries me is, do you trust Jim Caldwell in those tight games, the big games, let's say we get in the playoffs, to out-coach the coach across the field, the top coaches in the league, the Bruce Arians, the Pete Carrolls, the Mike Green Bay's coach, Mike McCarthy, those guys. Do you trust him to out-coach those guys in those big games? I don't, and I'm sitting here saying we should keep him, but I just don't know where to go with it. But, there are worse coaches out there. We could get a Leslie Frazier. Remember him with Minnesota. We could get all these other guys, Lovie Smiths and things like that, Ken Wisenhunts. But if it means getting Calvin back, I think we should bring Jim Caldwell back for one more year because I think Calvin's going to be a big piece in the run we make next season. But losing him, I don't think is going to be a detriment to our season because we haven't really won a lot with him. I said this before, I don't believe wide receivers make these teams into incredible, unbeatable teams. I think they're an asset to a team, and they're an incredible asset at times. But ultimately, Calvin Johnson doesn't make, the difference between 2 or 3 games won in a season, whereas a quarterback does. I think a good head coach could add you a game or two in a season with some of the decision-making he makes throughout the game and in-game adjustments he's able to make, or his coaching staff. But, with the Detroit Lions, they're going to lose Terrell Austin for whatever reason, which I don't understand. Terrell Austin's a super hot, commodity in the coaching world. I guess I don't get it. I didn't think he had a chance of being a head coach this season after the way the Detroit Lions started and the way their defense played, because basically all they lost was, 2 or 3 defensive linemen, and the defense played absolutely horrible and dreadful the first half of the year. And it turned around, but I didn't really anticipate Terrell Austin getting so much love where it seems like he's the big name coach and the coach everyone can't wait to hire this season. Like Atlanta missed out on something, and some of these other teams missed out on something, and should have hired Terrell Austin as their coach. I mean, I like to have him back as our D coordinator. I like his system. I like what he does add consistent pressure. We didn't early on in the season, but late in the season we started adding and blitzing more often. I like that. I'm big into that. I want to be pedal to the metal all the time. But, at this point, like I said, all the things that happened under Jim Caldwell, not firing Lombardi, thinking Lombardi was a good choice as offensive coordinator, kind of disagreeing with the firing after the firing happened, saying that Jim Bob Cooter did help the offense, but he wasn't the only reason the offense turned around, which he wasn't, but the running game ran for 100 yards 5 of the last 8 games, where before under Lombardi, it only happened one time. So, one time this season, I'm not sure what it was last year, but, just those things where he didn't have the fortitude to step in and say, Joe, this is not working. This needs to change. We need to do this, this, and this because these things are working. Get away from the bubble screens. Run once, throw some dumb pass option on third down every time. You need to do this, this, and this. Since Caldwell's supposed to be an offensive guru, I think that's where I fault Caldwell a lot. I mean, I have a lot of faults with Caldwell. Honestly, guys, I don't want him back. But what are the options at this point going forward with everyone on the team wanting Caldwell to stay? And I know players don't rule locker rooms. There's no guidance at the top. We have a guy that admits he's not a football guy as our president. They hired Ernie Accorsi. I thought the GM search would be done. I thought we'd already have one hired by now. That has not happened. It doesn't look like we're going to get a new GM. I believe it's going to be Sheldon White. I kind of had that feeling last week. But ultimately, I do think it's going to be Sheldon White as our GM going forward for the Detroit Lions. And going forward for the Detroit Lions, if it's a new GM or Sheldon White, what's going to happen with the Detroit Lions? We talked about the Detroit Lions having all this cap space. If they get rid of, Riley Reef, he clears $8 million, no dead money. They get rid of Tulloch, they get rid of Pettigrew. They're looking at having, $30 to $40 million, somewhere in that range of cap money. That's counting keeping Calvin Johnson at his current salary of $24 million. We'd still have between $30 and $40 million in cap money. That's all great, and I know everyone thinks we're going to go out and sign this just gluttony of players, but you look at our roster, there's a lot of guys we need to look at re-upping going forward. Joik Bell probably won't be back. That'll free up a little cap money. But here are some names that we possibly need to keep. Theo Riddick we need to re-sign. We need to either figure out what we're going to do with Haloti Ngata. Are we going to re-sign him? Tier Whitehead needs to be re-signed. Devin Taylor needs to be re-signed. We need to re-up Darius Slay. Caduce needs to be re-signed. I think Quinn's okay. But, these are all big options. I'd love to keep Tier Whitehead. I think he's a great player. I think he's only starting to scratch the surface on what he can become. We need to re-up Ezekiel Ansah. We need to re-up Darius Slay. If you guys want to find great value in free agency and not overpay, sign your own guys a year early. That's how you get good deals on free agents. Signing your own guys early. You always overpay when you go out in the free agent market. Whoever you're trying to get, for the most part, you're always going to overpay. They rip on the Eagles for the Byron Maxwell signing. Yep, it was a huge number, but you always overpay. The way you get deals like the Antonio Browns for the Steelers, deals like that, is by re-signing your own guys a year early, like the Pittsburgh Steelers do for the guys they want to keep and keep within their organization for a number of years. So, Ezekiel Ansah, please re-up him this year and get a good deal going forward into the future with Ezekiel Ansah. Darius Slay, too. Same thing. Get a good deal with him. Devin Taylor, up till this year, he didn't deserve to be re-signed because he didn't have good. I think he had 5 total sacks coming into this season. He had 7 this year. So is he turning the corner? I think he deserves to be re-signed. I wouldn't go, blowing my wad on him, but I'd make him a competitive offer to stay in Detroit. What do we do with Haloti Ngata? He played pretty well. I wouldn't mind bringing him back if we keep this same style defense. that we have been running, but what are we going to be running? Are we going to be running a 3-4? What's the new GM going to bring in? Are we going to have a new head coach? There's still a lot of unknowns, but if Haloti Ngata gives us an age-appropriate deal, I think we should re-sign him if it's an age-appropriate deal to help the middle of this defense and maybe possibly draft someone like Andrew Billings in the second round this year in the draft and have him learn under Haloti Ngata how to play the ins and outs and how to be a professional going forward. I think that'd be a big get for the Detroit Lions if he's healthy, if he gives us an age-appropriate deal. Don't go sign him for huge money in a lot of years like Matt Millen used to. We don't want that. Caduce, he deserves to be re-signed. I think he solved a lot of problems at the safety position that James Ahedebo was unable to. He will not be back with the Detroit Lions. Ahedebo won't. I don't believe Stephen Tulloch will, even though I know he's the leader in tackles for the Lions. He was exposed, guys. Stephen Tulloch plays his best football when he can hit either A-gap, coming straight at him. Teams would audible out of plays to expose him. Rasheed Mathis, same thing. I like him. I hope he comes back as a coach. I do not want him back as our cornerback. I like having Nevin Lawson. I like having Quandre Diggs. I like having Darius Slay. I like our young Caduce, Quinn. I like our secondary with those young guys, the kids on the team. Can Kyle Van Noy step up next year? Can the new defensive coordinator find a role for him? I think I talked about this last week. I think he's an underutilized player that we do not use correctly in any way, shape, or form. I don't think we used him for what he was good at BYU. I think we're trying to make him do things he's not good at. It's something the Lions always do. We draft these guys and make them do the opposite of what they're good at in college. It's fascinating. But the future could be bright for him going forward. Alex Carter, a third-round pick last year. I don't have any idea what we have in him, but he's a young guy. What's he going to develop into? What defense are we running? All these guys that need to be re-signed for the Lions, that's going to cost a good portion of our salary cap if we're able to keep most of them. I know we won't keep them all, but, if we're going to re-sign these guys and get good deals, especially Ezekiel Ansah and Darius Slay should be the priorities going into this offseason. I would say Teeter Whitehead and Caduce are probably 3-4, tied for third. Then Devin Taylor. Theo Riddick should be right there with Caduce and those guys, But to keep those guys, it's going to cost some money. So that's going to eat into our salary cap. How much money are we going to have after that to go out and get a lot of guys? So those are the questions pending the Detroit Lions. Just a week, not even a week, 4 days after the season ends. The possible retirement of Calvin Johnson's one. The re-signing of a lot of their own guys with a lot of cap room, counting the salary of Calvin Johnson, the $24 million. What's that going to look like? Who's going to be on the roster? Besides who's going to be on the roster, what direction is this organization going in is the other question. We have no idea. We have not hired a GM yet. We have no idea if the head coach is going to be. The current head coach we have now is going to be the head coach next year, or are we going to start over with a new head coach, new GM, a new direction, a new style defense? More than likely we'll have a new defense next year. What's that going to look like? Do the people we just talked about, Caduce, Whitehead, Ngata, Taylor, fit in this defense, this new defense? Is it going to be 3-4, 4-3? What's it going to be? We have no idea. But this is what's fun about the offseason. This gives us stuff to talk about. This is the information we're going to bring to you guys every week. Anything that breaks Detroit Lions football, that's what we'll do. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. We will be back next week, hopefully with information on possibly a new GM. I'd be surprised if we didn't have one. Maybe more information on the Calvin Johnson signing, and maybe we'll figure out what direction this team is actually going to go. Is Caldwell going to be back? Is he going to be? Are we going to go looking for a new head coach? These are all the questions that will be answered, hopefully next week, a lot of them, for the Detroit Lions. Again, I'd like to thank all of you guys. I'd like to thank all of you guys for all the support during the season. I look forward to this all year. I can't wait to get into the draft and free agency. If you guys want to cover it, you guys want to be better and smarter fans, come to Straight Lions Talk. See you next week.